And welcome back. Now, as we saw in that previous insert from the Dwelly family in Uppington in the Northern Cape, we are now dealing with a stigmatisation of people who test COVID-19 positive. So we're just struggling to get in touch with Kgalalelo Khule, who is someone we wanted to speak to, who has been a victim of these types of stigmatisation and discrimination, but just struggling to get that connection right. In the meantime, though, as we continue this conversation about why some coronavirus survivors become victims of stigmatization within their families and the broader community. Just imagine having to deal with your own fears and how to survive after falling ill, and then also to be targeted and stigmatized and discriminated against for having caught the illness. Now, one has to wonder, why is it? Why do people and communities behave in this way? Why are they not more supportive of coronavirus patients? Mandy Rodrigues is a clinical psychologist working on the front line with COVID-19 patients, and she joins us now to give us a bit of a perspective on this. Mandy, thanks so much for your time and welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Mandy, you actually wrote a piece speaking about the very real discrimination of people whom you see during and after being infected with COVID-19. Please tell us a little bit more about that experience.
So I work on the front line. I do see patients in a certain hospital, a private hospital. More patients waiting for their COVID results before elective surgery, and then numerous GPs have got hold of me in the community to deal with patients on virtual meetings who have been discriminated against after the fact. So, I mean, it reminds me of when I was younger and we used to read stories at school about lepers and leprosy and how they were discriminated against. And we're actually seeing the same in terms of COVID-19. We know that 2% of people don't survive the disease, but we're talking about the 98% that do recover and then are faced with discrimination in terms of the community. And, you know, no one wants to be patient zero, as they're calling everyone now. Because it's a communicable disease, you have to make certain that your contacts that you've been in touch with do know that you have been exposed to the virus. So you're dealing not only of isolation and loneliness and fear of respiratory disease, but once you recover, you're dealing with certain people who are discriminating. And my own son had COVID working on the front line. And I know myself, I'm in the field, and I was also fearful about getting infected by him, saying, you know, when are you going back to the hospital? Please don't come home. Please don't, you know, it's with us every day, and we don't know how long this is going to last.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that, Mandy, because sometimes perhaps, you know, it starts off even as a joke, you know, just a certain measure. I remember one day after it was said that people tested positive here at the SABC, when I got home, my family had placed the sanitizer right at the door. So as I was coming in, I needed to sanitize, you know, get rid of the clothes, whatever. But the question has to be asked, because while that may be innocent and, you know, you're dealing with a family context, what causes a broader society to stigmatize? Because with all the information available on the different media platforms, I mean, it's just everywhere. Everything is about COVID. So you would think that that would cause people to be less discriminatory, that there would be less stigma, but it seems the opposite is true.
Yes, I think that if you look even at HIV, I worked with AIDS patients in the early 90s, and there was this huge stigmatization because we had to take blood pressure and we had to take temperatures and touch the patients. But I almost find this is worse because back in the 90s, we knew how transmission of HIV happened. Right now, with all media exposure and the recent research saying that the virus is spread is now more airborne than what we anticipated, I think we discriminate because there's no, you know, there's fear. And there's fear of the unknown. And I think that makes us discriminate at this point, is this fear of no matter how careful we are, we don't know who's carrying it. People can look well. We don't know how the transmission is happening. And until we understand more about it, I think this discrimination is going to happen for a long time.
But then one has to push that particular issue a little further, because is the stigmatization due to prejudice against a person who is infected, or is it simply a fear that people may have of contamination?
I think there is prejudice. There's prejudice in terms of the perception that they didn't look after themselves, and they weren't protecting themselves. Even working on the front line, originally we were all lauded for going out and helping the community, but I am embarrassed sometimes when I go to the ward and I come back to my practice. I don't want to tell people where I've been, because I feel that sense of discrimination when I walk to the one side of the hospital where we know the COVID patients are. People look at us oddly. They are fearful. They make a wide berth around us. I think our house has also been stigmatized as the Rodrigues home, where we've got 3 people working on the front line. So it is a fear and it is a prejudice. And I think it's a lack of knowledge as to how this virus is mutating and spreading. And even the frontline workers who are protecting themselves with PPE are still getting this virus. There's 2 cases I've read about in Port Elizabeth, where the families, the one lady, and they were both professional nurses, but the one was completely discriminated against in taxis within the community. The house was known as the Corona House. And another nurse who was released from the stadium after recovering, her daughter was honest enough to say to the school, my mother has recovered from COVID, and she was made to stand outside on the playground all by herself. And those people had to actually leave the community and disappear, because there is this prejudice and this absolute fear that you're going to catch it yourself.
Now, I believe we do have Kgalalelo Khule on the line to us now. And Kgalalelo is someone, of course, who is dealing with the stigma brought about by the broader community after he actually recovered from COVID-19. Kgalalelo, thanks for speaking to us, and thanks for alerting us to your situation as well. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Great you and the of fellow South Africans.
So after recovering from what is, of course, a frightening virus, did it ever occur to you prior to it happening that people may actually discriminate against you for having had the virus?
It was not intention, and I was not ready for attack, but I can tell that I became open and I spoke to everyone after the positive COVID-19. But there was a picture that circulated that attacked and said people must be aware that I should not come near them. So that thing made me emotional, it made me weak. But I said to myself, let me be brave, let me gain strength and say, together we can beat this thing.
So we saw that picture, and if we can just put it up for the rest of our viewers to see. And it was absolutely shocking looking at that particular picture and it doing the rounds. But please explain to us what happened after this picture actually started circulating.
I can attest with you that I became emotional. It was a very difficult time even for my family. It was a very difficult time for my friends, close friends for that matter. I could not even eat. I could not even think straight. But the first thing that I did was to contact the local station commander to say, how can you assist me to track these people? But be it as it may, at times you pray to God that these things, when they happen to you, God must give you strength actually to overcome them. So I thought, let me give them to the Almighty to deal with them, because we cannot live with such people who are in attack when the country and the world at large is dealing with this whole pandemic.
And we'll just put that picture up for you shortly so you can have a look at exactly what Kgalalelo had to deal with. And the picture, it's a picture of Kgalalelo, his face, and in red it says, "Be aware." He tested positive for COVID-19 and also has hepatitis B. Rustenburg community, please be aware of him. Now, when you went to work, Kgalalelo, how did this play out after that picture started doing the rounds?
The picture came in just a day after I've received a message that I've tested positive. Then I had to self-isolate myself. I had to go on quarantine. So I could go to work immediately so that I can see the reaction of my other colleagues. But immediately when I got off quarantine, I stayed home. And I just came back to work this Monday. People have been friendly towards me. People have just been talking to me. It's an unfortunate part that I haven't been to the street as a law enforcement officer, so as to get the reaction of other community members. But I can tell you that most of the people get me calls, most of the people send me SMSs, messages on WhatsApp to say, be cool, be strong, we are right behind you.
And Mandy, just listening to the absolute harrowing experience that Kgalalelo has been through, how should people be dealing with those who have tested positive around them in order to support them instead of discriminating against them?
Look, I think we need to also understand the way the brain works is we try and file information as it happens, such as like when the World Trade Center, we try and make sense of it and say, okay, well, something traumatizes us when we don't make sense of it and when we can't understand it. And as soon as something like that happens, or when we're grappling to deal with how this is spread, and this is the entire world whose lives have changed, we've got to try and put it in a box and understand how this is happening. We need to give empathy to people who've been through it. And actually, you know, all of us here on the front line are waiting for an antibody test so that we can at least say we've had it, we've recovered, we've been through it, we can share that information. I mean, people like your caller who's been through weeks of isolation and who has been through discrimination and I mean, I think that picture is horrific to be going around. They need to have some sort of empathy, because at the end of the day, all of us are getting more and more exposed to people closer to us. And we're all talking about herd immunity, and until it happens closer to home and you realize, you know, that you don't have the support, it's frightening at the very beginning when you hear about people getting the disease. And I think we need to give empathy, and we need to understand, and we need to understand that it is not something we are deliberately going out and looking for. You know, we're practicing everything that we can, and once someone is recovered, well, there needs to be some sort of understanding as to what they've been through and some sort of empathy.
Kgalalelo, what is your experience currently? Do you find that people have changed their attitude towards you, and what are your concerns currently?
I can tell that people are trying to get information as much as they can. People are just sending in messages to say, I've got this kind of symptoms. I'm experiencing this kind of things that are happening towards me. But I always say to people, let us try to follow the guidelines. Let us try to be together and pray as much as we can. Because of big as it may, we cannot know where do we get in contact with such disease. But people are coming out, people are saying, you know, we were scared of you, we could not even talk to you. Some said, I couldn't even call you. But I always advise that let us talk, let us engage on this matter, because it affects all of us.
And have you had counseling, Kgalalelo?
I haven't consulted as yet. but I'm on a process of consulting because of, you'd remember that immediately after I got out of my quarantine, I had to stay a little bit 7 days again so that I can just be clear before I go back to work. The first thing that I did was to register a case with the police over that picture, and the process that is unfolding now is to visit some people so that they can just give me such counseling.
Mandy, is that something that you would actually recommend for Kgalalelo to actually receive counseling and other people who may be dealing with stigma and discrimination as a result of testing COVID positive?
Absolutely. We're going to sit with the society they say that a third of us are going to be traumatized by this. I think if you've had the virus, you're going to be even more at risk for post-traumatic stress disorder. And the mode of treatment is to talk about it and debrief and engage in terms of an understanding as to what is going on, and to kind of equip yourself with the right information and the right exposure to social media and media online and the articles that you're reading. Because the more we inform ourselves about certain aspects, the more we can create this folder that then we can close and we can shut down and we can store it inside our brains and make sense of it and say, I can protect myself and my loved ones. And it is not something I deliberately invited into my body.
So, Kgalalelo, really sorry for what you've had to go through. You too, Mandy, as frontline workers, and your family for the discrimination and stigma that you've had to face. But what would be your final word, your parting shot to South Africans watching right now, Kgalalelo?
I want to say to South Africans, let us come together, let us join our hands and fight this stigma, fight this pandemic that we are dealing with. Let us not discriminate people who have tested positive. Let us support them. Let us give them love. Let us say to them, we are here, we are supporting you, and together, I'm telling you, we will beat this.
Well, thank you so much, Mandy Rodrigues, who is a clinical psychologist, and Kgalalelo Khule, who is a patient who has recovered from COVID-19 but has been discriminated against, discussing the social stigma in context of COVID-19, as some patients have had to face discrimination due to the negative association attached to the virus. Well, that's our show for this morning. Thank you so much for being with us.